So last week, Pastor Chris preached through the first 15 verses of chapter 3, and we learned that God has created certain rhythms and patterns in our lives, and that there are appropriate times and inappropriate times for certain things to happen. And so we will experience, we read about this, we saw this, that we will experience various types of good or various types of evil in our lives. We'll have those seasons, that there will, for example, be times of war or times of peace, as we read about. And our passage this morning kicks off speaking about injustice. And injustice is a reality, very much so in the world we live in, and yet God has put it on each one of our hearts to have a heart and a desire for justice in some way. He has, and we'll touch on that here in a few minutes as to why that is. And so this morning I want to look at one philosopher who was in England in the 15 and 1600s. His name was Thomas Hobbes, and for those of you familiar with the old comics section in the newspaper, or even what a newspaper is, this has nothing to do with the brilliant comic of Calvin and Hobbes, by the way. Okay, not related. However, Thomas Hobbes' focus had to do with politics, and he believed in a very strong government and a very strong central authority. He thought that without it, the world would descend into chaos and into conflict. There's probably some truth to some of that. His main work was even a book called Leviathan, which focused on a social contract theory that he had. And so he believed that it was the job of the government to handle everything related to justice. And while it is the job of the government to seek the good of the people, we understand there is a greater authority to which we appeal for justice. And so, this morning, the message is entitled, When Wickedness Replaces Justice. We'll see that early on in our passage. And our passage this morning is Ecclesiastes 3:16 through 22. And so, if you would, take a moment and turn there. If you are using the Pew Bible, that passage starts on page 519 and ends on page 520, just so you know. And so, if you would, go ahead and turn there. And if you are able, would you go ahead and stand for the reading of God's Word this morning? Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 16 through 22. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is, there's that word again, vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and to the dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? And so I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? That was the reading of God's Word. Thank you. You may be seated. So the main idea we're going to explore this morning is that the imperfect justice we see in this life should make us long for a just God all the more. The imperfect justice we see in this life should make us long for our just God all the more. We're going to dive in this morning. There are three ways that we're going to look at that wickedness impacts justice in this life. All right, three ways that wickedness impacts justice in this life. The first is that we are left with a corrupted justice. So what we would ideally look at as just has been corrupted. We're also going to see that there's a common death. There's a common death as we talk about humans, we talk about beasts. And then this morning we're going to see that there is a contented duty. A contented duty, as we're told, to find joy in our work. And so the first thing we're going to look at this morning is this idea of corrupted justice. And that's found in the first two verses, verse 16 and 17 this morning, which say, "Moreover, I saw under the sun in the place of justice that there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness that there was wickedness. And I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work." And so Solomon here makes an observation that I think all of us have seen in our lifetime, that there is a proper place for justice to be given. And each of us expects justice to be served. We have this expectation that we walk in that certain people are going to do their job the right way, and justice will be the end result. Or that certain positions will have that type of role, and they will indeed enact justice. And yet we observe that that's not always the case. The places where there should be, oftentimes there's not. It leads us to ask questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? Or why would God allow that to happen? Or why do the wicked seem to prosper? Why do the wicked seem to prosper? See, we want people to get what they deserve. Most of the time. Right? There's a reason we don't ask the question, God, why do you allow bad things to happen to bad people? We don't ask that question, do we? We just don't, because we see that they got what they deserved in our eyes. And so that they got what's coming to them. So we don't ask those types of questions. They got what they deserve. Now, some of you are aware of this about me. Either way, I'm going to share it. It's a little vulnerable. That there are many of you in this room that are readers. You read a ton. You love it. You would pick up a book before you would do anything else. It's not usually my go-to thing. Okay? As a matter of fact, reading is difficult for me. Reading, it probably takes me twice as long to read a book as it would take most of you. Okay? And there's one particular book that I read several years ago that had me so intrigued, outside of the Bible, by the way, that had me so intrigued that before I even got home, I was anticipating sitting down to read that book. Okay? Some of you may have even heard of it. It's a book called Just Mercy. They made a movie out of it, so maybe you've heard of that part with Jamie Foxx, Michael B. Jordan. And it tells the story of a lawyer named Brian Stevenson. And he was devoted to seeking justice for those that were falsely incarcerated. And so, and wrongfully accused. And so in 1986, there was a young lady in Alabama who was murdered. And her murder was pinned on a gentleman named Walter McMillan. Walter happened to be 11 miles away at the time of the murder at a church fish fry. He had witnesses. He had alibis. There was nothing that put him at the site of that murder, and yet he was the one that was wrongfully accused. He was wrongfully accused. And this in particular, not all of them this way, this particular case was based off of the color of his skin. Because the evidence didn't matter. He was found guilty and he was put on death row for a murder he did not commit. Now, there are stories like this that go around all over the place. This one in particular has just really stuck with me, though. And so for 6 years, he was on death row while Brian Stevenson fought for him. And then in 1993, he was finally acquitted and released after 6 years of being on death row. He was unjustly imprisoned for 6 years before justice finally came. See, sometimes injustice looks like people getting something they don't deserve, right? In his case, he got jail time, and he didn't deserve it. See, Walter was innocent, but he spent 6 years in jail. And yet there are also those people who are guilty of crimes that are allowed to be free and found not guilty. That's also not serving justice. So we imprison the innocent and we release the guilty because justice has been overrun with wickedness. It's in its place. See, and this bothers us because we desire to see justice served, and there is a reason for that. See, the reason is you and I are made in the image of a just God. You see that? We have a heart for it because we are made in the image of a just God, which means our heart to see justice reflects the heart and the character of God himself. And that's why if those types of things bother you, they should. Because you're reflecting the heart of God. And Solomon here in our passage, he laments here because justice has been replaced with wickedness and righteousness with wickedness. See, there's a proper place for justice. There are even people in positions of authority that we would expect to enact justice. For example, I would assume that most of us would expect police officers to act justly in their dealings with people and criminals. We would expect courts or judges or places along those lines to act justly with those with whom come before them. We elect government officials to act for the good of the people, which means we are expecting them to act justly. And yet we often see corruption in these places. What's right is not always what is done. The guilty aren't always accused and convicted. As a matter of fact, we see this probably more often than we would like to. Sometimes we may even turn a blind eye to it, like these folks do. But you can get around certain things if you have the right legal team or you have the right amount of money. You can. People do. People have. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it reality. And this isn't a new practice. It's existed since the times of Scriptures. In Isaiah 5, verse 23, it says, "Woe to those who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right." See, there were those even back in Isaiah's time that were acquitting guilty folks in order to gain something for themselves, money or whatever the bribe happened to be. Maybe it was land or cattle or whatever. And so they would be bribed in order to let a guilty person go free. It's not something new. It's something that has happened over the ages. And so if someone can benefit from the guilty walking free, we may see that happen. Bribes accepted under the table. Places of justice corrupt with wickedness. And when we see things like this, we are going to be tempted to have an attitude the way that Asaph has in Psalm 73. And in Psalm 73, verses 2 and 3 say this. It says, "But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." I was envious of the prosperity that he saw the wicked gaining. It's like, why is nothing bad happening to these folks when all they do is bad? Why is that? He had started to develop this heart that was envious of that. And yet later on, he even talks about, in Psalm 73, how the wicked are at ease and they increase in their riches. And I think a lot of us observe those things around us and in the world that we live in with different people. We see the appearance of prosperity among the wicked, and we think these folks are acting foolish, but they're living a more comfortable life than we are. See, in general, humans want gain. They want comfort. They want safety. And when we see others acting wickedly and living and having all of those things, it makes us wonder if it's really worth it to live righteously. If we see the wicked getting all of this and prospering, then what's worth living righteously? Why should I? And maybe we start to develop that type of heart. And that's a dangerous one to have. Is God going to reward us someday? And here's what I want to tell you. Take heart, because he promises that he will. He promises that he will. You can trust that. Because every promise that God has made, he has fulfilled. And will continue. But in this world, there's no guarantee of justice. Maybe you've heard the saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe you've heard that before, and there is truth in that statement when power goes unchecked, right? And so how do we obtain a world of justice? Well, for Hobbes, he believed that human life, due to its nature, was short and it was brash, and that it would lead to a war of all people against all other people, trying to gain, trying to find their own safety, their own comfort, those types of things. Because in his mind, the only way to end the chaos and injustice was to surrender the freedoms that we have, or at least some of them, to a sovereign authority, and then that authority would help gain peace and safety. That was his thought, and that we would all benefit from it in that way. See, justice would give us the peace and the safety that we need, but that it would ultimately come in large part from people surrendering certain rights to the government. What Solomon says is that even though wickedness is prevalent now, even though it sits where we should have righteousness and justice, it's only for a time. It's only for a time. Remember, that's what we talked about last week. It's what Chris talked about. There's a time for all of these different things. And here we see that in verse 17, right? There's a time for every matter and for every work. And so there is a time for it. And yet Solomon would agree we need to surrender to a sovereign authority, but his definition of that authority and Hobbes' definition might be a little different. It might be a little different. See, those that sit in those places of authority in this world are imperfect, and they're going to uphold justice imperfectly. They're going to be influenced to do things in a way that falls short of the goal, because under the sun, justice will be corrupted. Under the sun. But verse 17 tells us that ultimately God will judge the righteous and the wicked, and this is a promise from him that we know is true. This is a comforting thought for the Christian, because every time that we ask that question, why is that evil person prospering, we can remember that God will judge them in his timing. We may not see it, but it will happen. And we can find comfort in that. See, above the sun lies perfect judgment from a perfect God. And the judgment exemplifies his character perfectly, because not only is God just, but God is merciful. And so without mercy, every human would be judged and sent to hell. Everyone. Because there are no righteous humans on our own merit. Only those God sees as righteous. And so judgment for the righteous and the wicked maybe have a little bit different endings, right? We know Romans 3:23. Many of us in the room could quote it, but if we go back a verse to Romans 3:22, it talks about the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus for all who believe. See, God considers those righteous who have faith in Christ Jesus, which means that we are judged according to his righteousness, and that eternal life awaits. For the wicked, they have no advocate to come before the throne of God like we do. They have no advocate. They're judged according to their wickedness, and they're sentenced to eternity apart from God. And so in this life, relying on the world and the government authorities to uphold justice and righteousness is going to end up, in all reality, as vanity, as Solomon says. And yet, that doesn't mean we should cease to pursue it or to desire it. I think that would be a misread of the text, to say that means we don't have to desire this, we don't have to seek out for justice, because we know that it's going to fall short here, but we do know God will do it eventually, so we don't need to worry about it. I think that's a misreading, because there's other passages in Scripture that command the opposite. Micah 6:8, for example. He's told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do what? To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. We're commanded to do justice, or depending on the translation, to seek justice, right? To make it even more clear, we see what Jesus says about it in Matthew 23:23. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." See, these religious folks, they gave sacrifices, which was good. He says they should do that too, but they ignored all the matters of the law. They ignored seeking out justice and mercy. They ignored those things. And Jesus called them out on it. See, justice is a weighty matter. It says so right here. That means it's not an easy thing to obtain. But that doesn't mean that we put it off, that we put it on the back burner, that we ignore it, that we seek not to do it. We're still to be people of justice, even though we recognize that we're not going to see complete justice here on earth. But we do know that in God's timing it'll come. And so while we desire to see it, we understand that worldly systems may corrupt that justice. But ultimately, God will see to it that the righteous and the wicked are both judged. See, we actually see part of God's justice in Solomon's next point. By the way, that was the longest point of the message. We share a common death with the beasts and the animals. That's the next point. There's a common death that we read about in verses 18 through 21. It says, I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to the dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? See, when righteousness and justice are replaced with wickedness, Solomon points out that human beings begin to see that they are like beasts in certain ways. Now, that's not a very flattering comparison, by the way. I would assume most of us in the room, if someone called us a beast or some sort of animal, would probably be a little bit offended. We've even seen recently the damage that can be done and the offense that it causes when someone is compared to an animal. It's hurtful because we're superior to them. We are. We're superior to animals. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And so Solomon says, when righteousness and justice are replaced with wickedness, it reveals to men they are but beasts. But did you catch the language that he uses in this passage? So it says the children of God, or some translations might see the sons of Adam. And then it talks about breath and where that came from. And then it says, from dust to dust. All of these terms, this language, takes us back to creation in Genesis. That's where it takes us back to. All of it takes us back there. And so that same God that gives us physical breath gives breath to the beasts. In Genesis 3:19 is what he quotes, that from dust to dust they will return. See, Solomon reminds us of where we came from and where the beasts came from. The same God that created you created them. The same God that gives you breath that allows you to breathe gives them breath to allow them to breathe. The one that took you from the dust returns you to the dust. It's the same. And so there's a lot of similarities as he dives back into Genesis. Now, don't take this as a direct comparison, saying that humans and animals are alike in many, many ways, because that's simply not true. And yet, the one gives us breath, also gives the animals breath, right? But there is one thing that separates us from animals, more than one, but I'm only going to focus on one. And the one is that we have the ability to reason. We have the ability to reason. See, Hobbes would actually say that we act beastly, but with reason. That we can avoid this untimely death. We just don't have the passion to be able to do it. But what Solomon shares is a bit different. See, when wickedness replaces righteousness, we lose that ability to reason and we begin to resemble the animals. We lose that ability to reason. Hobbes would argue that we behave like animals, but with reason. Solomon says when we act like animals, we're acting apart from reason. But not only that, men and beasts have the same fate. They both die a physical death. And so Solomon says, hey, we have the same fate. Death is the great equalizer in this case. That we need to consider, I think we do need to consider, though, God's original intent with men and beasts. See, just a bit earlier in Genesis, we read that God created us superior to animals, or at least I alluded to it. See, we're the only part of God's creation that His Word says is made in His image. We're superior. And yet, look at what God does with man and beast in the garden. Look at Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." See, man was given dominion over the things that move on the earth, over animals. We're supposed to be superior. We're supposed to have authority over them, to rule over them, to dominate over them. And yet wickedness in the world and sin in the world have altered that a bit. See, when justice and order are lacking, when we're pursuing our own gain above other things, our behavior begins to resemble that of beasts and animals. There's a story in the Old Testament in the book of Daniel that gives us an example of man resembling the behavior of beasts. Some of you already know where I'm going with this, and that's great. Right? We read about King Nebuchadnezzar, and we see God's judgment on him, which is a fulfillment of a prophecy in a dream that Daniel just interpreted. And I want to read out of Daniel chapter 4, a few verses here, verses 30 through 34. It says, "And the king answered and said, 'Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence, and for the glory of my majesty?' While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, 'O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you will be made to eat grass like an ox. And 7 periods of time will pass over you until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will.' Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High. And I praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation." Did you hear it? King Nebuchadnezzar let his pride, his desire for his own power, his own glory get in the way. And see, this is what happens when we stop seeking to pursue justice and we begin to focus on our own pride and arrogance. See, he has to eat like the animals. He begins to look like the animals, if you read the description. But then notice in that last verse, he said his reason returned to him. See, that means that he acted without reason. When he was resembling the beasts, he was acting without reason, acting without dignity, acting without humility, or with humility. And as a ruler, God humbled him. See, we can resemble animals in this way when our reasoning lacks. Psalms gives us a couple examples as well. Psalm 49, verse 20. Man in his pomp, yet without understanding, man without understanding is like the beasts that perish. Sounds oddly familiar to what we just read, isn't it? See, when we lack understanding and reasoning, we become like those beasts. And our ability to reason is what sets us apart, and it lacks there. Psalm 73, verse 22. I was brutish and ignorant. I was like a beast toward you. See, what we also need to recognize is that we don't resemble animals in that way all the time. But there is one thing that we do have in common that's called out here. That both will die a physical death. Humans have an expiration date, and so do beasts and animals. So this is a hard reality for some. And why is that? Well, we just read about how justice is corrupt. Well, understand that death is the consequence for what? That's the consequence for what? For our unrighteous deeds, for wickedness, for injustice. That's what ties this together. We have the same end as the animals, where we all have the same death sentence. And this comes as a result of wickedness and sin that has entered the world. See, as a result of wickedness, we all have this physical death sentence. We understand that our bodies are slowly decaying until God's appointed time for us. And so we have the same fate, and we return to the same place, to dust. See, none of us live forever on this earth. And I would submit that most of us don't want to, when you consider what we're surrounded by. In many ways, That would almost be more punishment. It would be a good thing. And yet there's still a little bit of a fear of death for many of us as well, which kind of is interesting the way those two things play together. See, none of us live forever in this life. And outside of Enoch and Elijah, whom God took to heaven before they died, we know that death is a part of life. It is. I've done several funerals over the years. I did my grandpa's funeral, and he was 96 years old when he passed away. And then just last week, I did the funeral of a 24-year-old young man. See, death is inevitable, but when it happens is uncertain. There's not a specific age. Everything from 24 to 96 to less than 24 to older than 96. And so I want to encourage us in light of that should actually help us to some degree. The understanding that our physical death will come at some point, because we can always look forward to what's to come after. And so this verse 21, I want to encourage us, don't be confused by it. It says, who knows whether the spirit of man goes up and the spirit of the beast goes down? See, Solomon's main point is that we have no certainty about what happens beyond the grave for those that are under the sun, that don't know who God is. And so they're no different than animals. Now, even though there are popular books out there, you might have even read some, where someone claimed to have died and spent time in heaven, and then they came back to life, and they wrote about it. There really hasn't been a person who definitely died, stayed dead for several days, and then came back to life and wrote about it. Maybe Lazarus could have, right? Maybe Lazarus could have, but we have no record of him writing about his experience, right? And so man and beast have this in common. Both are going to die a physical death at the end of this life. And so we have this reality that the life that we live is surrounded by wickedness and injustice, and that this life is going to end with death. And those are very real things. And we arrive there at our third point, which is that we're to find joy in our work anyways. Or, to put it differently, we're supposed to have contented duty. Be content in our duty. And we find this in verse 22. It says, so I saw there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for this is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Now, if you're like me, you read this verse, and you're like, wait. We've already talked about work. Within the first 2 chapters, we already talked about work. How does this verse fit with what we're talking about here? And why is Solomon repeating this throughout the book? Because we do read. It's what would appear to be almost randomly placed verses talking about how you should enjoy your work or enjoy your food or those types of things. And it really is kind of interesting. See, we've seen that there's a desire for justice, that all of us are going to die physically, that God's going to bring judgment to the righteous and to the wicked. But here he says to enjoy your work, you don't know the future. In other words, don't be afraid of what is to come. Don't live in fear right now. If you do, it's going to control you. It will keep you from being able to enjoy what God has given you in the present. See, Hobbes would say the opposite of fear would be safety, that we can't enjoy our work unless justice is present, and that provides us safety. That when safety provided by a sovereign authority is present, only then can we enjoy our work. So we have to have this feeling of safety to be able to enjoy our work, is the way Hobbes would look at it. That only if we have a feeling of safety can we reduce our anxiety and our worry about the future. But that safety comes through a fear or a trust in government, as he would say. Solomon ends in a different place, though. While he agrees that a feeling of safety helps with fear, he knows we can only receive that from a different source. See, it's a fear of or a trust in God that allows us to enjoy life, to find joy in work, and to find peace even when life is crowding us with wickedness. See, many walk around in fear that they're going to experience injustice or wickedness, and to be honest, many will, and many do, and many have. And so what gets them through these times? Is it trusting that the government will make it right someday? I almost hope not. What's going to get them through? What's going to get them through is trusting in God, because trusting in Him is the only way to peace in all of those situations. See, we're reminded in the Gospel of Matthew to not worry about tomorrow, because each day has enough trouble of its own. And so we need not worry about what lies ahead, but we need to live in the moment, here and now, and enjoy our work, because it is our lot. See, we don't have to live in fear. We can hate the wickedness around us and still enjoy the blessings that God gives us. Knowing that injustice always exists in the world doesn't mean you can't enjoy anything. Rejoice in your work. God's creation still exists to be enjoyed, even though wickedness runs rampant. Now, I would also submit this morning that in addition to this verse speaking of enjoying our work now, in spite of the wickedness that surrounds us and the death that awaits us, that there's a second thought to what he's getting at. That Solomon actually, another thought is that he says the knowledge that God will enact justice in his time, as well as the uncertainty of what's to come, should allow us to live with joy now. On the flip side, that same uncertainty of what's to come should allow the wicked to live with joy now. See, both the righteous and the wicked should enjoy his work. You see, for the righteous, it's a precursor to finding enjoyment for all of eternity with God, and it's a little bit of a foretaste. But for the wicked, enjoyment in this life is all that they're going to have. It's all that they're going to have. Because on the other side of this life, eternal torment awaits. And so this is their time for enjoyment. See, Solomon's already told us that God's put eternity on man's heart. And under the sun, we can't know the answers to those questions about what is to come that we see in verses 21 and 22. See, those answers come from the one who is above or over the sun. The New Testament scriptures even give us more about what is to come. We can have more certainty in our future. While there is still some unknown about exactly what every moment in heaven is going to be like, we do know there's an eternal life waiting for us on the other side of this life. We know that for the one who loves God, who is over the sun, that life involves being in the presence of God. That life involves no more pain and no more tears. That life involves being in heaven where justice has been perfectly enacted and the righteous are present and the wicked are absent. And we can enjoy this life in our work even though we live in the midst of wickedness, and our time here is short because we know what's ahead. And so as I try to bring this home this morning, I want to remind us that the corrupt justice, common death, and joy and work all fall under God's sovereignty. See, He's sovereign over all of those things. And so while we saw that under the sun, justice was going to be overrun with wickedness and death was going to be inevitable, remember where Solomon ends his thoughts in Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commands, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. See, our job is to fear God, and then God will bring every good and evil into judgment. So what does that mean for you and me, for how do we live here and now in the face of these things? Well, first, it means that we trust that God is just, but that we're thankful for His mercy. We can't try to split the two. We can't try to split the two. Because if we're going to trust that God is just, then we would have to say, if there is no mercy, then I'm going to hell. And so we can trust that He is just, that justice will happen because it's who He is, but we can also be thankful for the mercy that He's given us to allow us to be a part of His family and to give us salvation. And so we live a life that trusts in Him, but also is thankful for His mercy. Second, I would submit that we live with peace, that when we've endured this life and its struggles to the end, that God has prepared a place for us in His perfect presence and His perfect kingdom forever. So we can have peace in this life, even though we're going to endure struggles, and hardships, and we're going to experience wickedness. We're going to experience injustice. And then lastly, that we can rejoice in our work. And we've spent time talking about this over the last few weeks. I don't need to dive into that too much. And yet it's here because God gave it to us. And so we want to enjoy what it is that he's given to us. And so I want to ask, if you guys would you bow with me? Would you bow your heads, and we're going to pray here for just a moment.